April 1241. The plains of Central Europe stood on the edge of something no one there truly understood yet. On one side gathered the finest warriors of the medieval world, armored knights, battle-hardened nobles, and holy orders who believed they were the last line of defense for an entire civilization. They carried steel forged by the best craftsmen of their time, rode warhorses bred for power, and marched with absolute confidence that no force on earth could break them. For centuries, European knights had been the definition of dominance in warfare. They were the tanks of their age, unstoppable in a charge, feared across kingdoms, and backed by faith that told them victory was not just likely, but destined. To them, this coming battle wasn't a question of survival. It was a test they fully expected to pass. And then the Mongols arrived. They didn't come with grand speeches or banners meant to intimidate. They came fast, silent, and precise, an army unlike anything Europe had ever faced. Within days, what was supposed to be a decisive stand would spiral into chaos. Formations would collapse. Command would vanish. Confidence would turn into confusion, then into fear, and finally into something far worse. In just 3 days, one of the largest forces Europe had assembled would be shattered. Not defeated, erased. The belief in the invincibility of European knights, built over generations, would be broken in a way that could never be fully repaired. This wasn't just a battle. It was a shockwave that would echo for centuries. A brutal reminder that power, no matter how established, can disappear faster than anyone expects. To understand how this catastrophe unfolded, you have to start by rethinking everything you've been told about the Mongols. They weren't a chaotic horde charging blindly across continents. They were the product of one of the most advanced military systems the world had ever seen, built, refined, and perfected under Genghis Khan and carried forward by his successors. From the moment a Mongol child could sit upright, they were being trained for war. Riding wasn't a skill, it was second nature. Archery wasn't a specialty, it was survival. By adulthood, every warrior could fire arrows with deadly accuracy at full speed, live off minimal supplies for weeks, and cover distances that would exhaust most armies before a battle even began. But what truly set them apart wasn't just individual skill. It was discipline, coordination, and a command structure that functioned with near-perfect efficiency. The Mongol army was organized into units with mathematical precision, groups of 10, 100, 1,000, each one trained to operate independently or as part of a larger system. Orders moved fast. Adaptation was instant. And perhaps most importantly, ego had no place on the battlefield. Victory was everything. How you achieved it didn't matter. By 1241, this system had already reshaped the known world. The Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the very doorstep of Europe. Entire civilizations had fallen. Powerful Islamic empires, fortified cities in Central Asia, even regions protected by massive defensive structures like the Great Wall. None of it had stopped them. None of it had even slowed them down for long. Now, under the command of Batkun, grandson of Genghis Khan himself, the Mongols turned their attention west. But this wasn't a reckless invasion. It was a calculated campaign. Bata didn't move as a single overwhelming force. Instead, he divided his army, sending different columns across Eastern Europe with a clear objective: isolate, destabilize, and eliminate any force capable of resistance before it could unite. Cities were burned not just for conquest, but as signals. Entire regions were devastated to create panic ahead of their advance. And behind the scenes, Mongol intelligence networks, often disguised as merchants or travelers, fed them critical information about European tactics, terrain, and political divisions. By the time the Mongols approached Poland, they didn't just know their enemy, they understood how their enemy thought. On the European side, the response was urgent, but fragmented. News of the Mongol advance arrived in waves of horror. Cities wiped out in a single day, populations erased, armies destroyed before they could even organize. For many, it didn't sound like war. It sounded like something apocalyptic. Still, Europe rallied. Duke Henry II of Silesia recognized what was at stake. If the Mongols weren't stopped here, there would be nothing left between them and the heart of Europe. So he sent out calls for reinforcements across Poland, the German states, and beyond. And for once, divisions were set aside. Knights answered. From the west came heavily armored nobles, men raised on the ideals of honor and battlefield glory. The Teutonic Knights and the Knights Templar, elite warrior orders forged in the Crusades, joined the effort, bringing with them discipline, experience, and an unshakable belief that they were fighting for something greater than themselves. Infantry followed as well, spearmen, crossbowmen, even civilians who had never seen battle but were willing to stand and fight. On paper, it looked like a formidable force. Possibly 25,000 to 40,000 men, maybe more if you believe the more dramatic accounts. They had numbers, they had armor, they had faith, and most importantly, they had confidence. But confidence can be dangerous when it's built on the wrong assumptions. European warfare at the time was centered around the knight, the ultimate weapon of the medieval battlefield. A fully armored rider on a powerful warhorse could smash through infantry lines with terrifying force. Battles were often decided by these charges, by close combat, by raw physical dominance. Honor mattered. Reputation mattered. Individual bravery could turn the tide. The Mongols didn't play that game. Where European armies relied on impact, the Mongols relied on movement. Where knights sought close combat, Mongols avoided it until the exact moment it worked in their favor. Where European forces valued individual heroism, Mongol tactics demanded collective precision. It wasn't just a difference in weapons. It was a difference in philosophy. The Mongols fought to win, efficiently, decisively, and without hesitation. They would retreat if it gave them an advantage. They would deceive if it created an opening. They would exhaust their enemy before ever engaging directly. And when the moment finally came to strike, it wasn't a clash of equals. It was an execution. This was the real imbalance between the two sides, not just numbers or equipment, but mindset. On one side stood an army built on tradition, honor, and centuries of proven dominance. On the other stood a force built on adaptation, intelligence, and relentless efficiency. And neither side fully understood the other. That misunderstanding would prove catastrophic. The morning of April 7, 1241 didn't begin with a clash of steel. It began with distance. Across the open fields, the European army formed in a way that would have inspired confidence in any other war. Heavy cavalry stood at the center, knights in polished armor, their lances upright, their warhorses restless beneath them. Infantry filled the flanks, spearmen, crossbowmen, and volunteers who had answered the call to defend their land and their faith. Banners moved in the wind, symbols of power, unity, and belief. To anyone watching, it looked like strength made visible. And then, at the edge of the horizon, the Mongols appeared. They didn't charge. They didn't rush forward to meet the Europeans head-on. Instead, they moved lightly, almost casually, their smaller horses stepping across the field with a kind of unsettling calm. To the European knights, it looked underwhelming, almost disappointing. This was the enemy they had heard so much about? Then the first arrows came. They didn't arrive as a single volley, but as a wave, then another, and another after that. Mongol horse archers rode forward just enough to reach their maximum range, released their arrows with precision, and then turned away before any counterattack could reach them. It was controlled, deliberate, and repeated over and over again. At first, the European soldiers held firm. Shields were raised. Armor absorbed the hits. The knights remained disciplined, waiting for the moment when the real battle would begin, the moment when they could charge, close the distance, and end this quickly. But that moment never came. Instead, the arrows kept falling. Each Mongol rider carried dozens of arrows, and behind them were supply horses carrying hundreds more. The math was simple and brutal. Thousands of riders, each releasing shot after shot, meant a constant rain of projectiles that never seemed to stop. It wasn't about a single devastating strike. It was about pressure, relentless, grinding pressure. Hours passed. The European army remained in formation, but something was starting to change. Horses began to panic as arrows found the weak points in their armor. Men shifted under the strain, adjusting shields, reacting to impacts, waiting for orders that never seemed to come. Crossbowmen tried to respond, but by the time they loaded and aimed, the Mongols were already out of range again. Frustration built. This wasn't how battles were supposed to work. There was no clear enemy to engage, no line to break, no moment of decisive action. Just distance, movement, and the constant sting of arrows from an opponent that refused to stand still. Some knights began to shout insults across the field, calling the Mongols cowards, accusing them of running instead of fighting. But the Mongols weren't running. They were shaping the battlefield, controlling the pace, the distance, and the psychology of the fight. By midday, the reality started to sink in. The Europeans weren't in control. They were reacting. Every instinct they had, their training, their experience, told them to charge, to close the gap, to turn this into the kind of battle they understood. But their commanders held them back, knowing that a reckless advance could lead to disaster. So they waited. And as they waited, they suffered. Arrows kept coming. Not all of them were lethal, but they didn't need to be. Wounds accumulated. Horses weakened. Men grew tired, not from fighting but from enduring. And perhaps worst of all, doubt began to spread. If this was only the beginning, what would come next? As the sun began to set, the battlefield grew quieter, but not peaceful. The Mongols withdrew just out of sight, their silhouettes fading into the distance. For the Europeans, it should have been a moment of relief. It wasn't. The wounded filled the camp, their injuries a constant reminder of what the day had cost, and how little they had achieved in return. Hundreds were dead or dying, and they hadn't even engaged in what they would consider a real battle. The idea of honor, of glory, of decisive victory, it all felt distant now. And then the night began. Somewhere beyond the darkness, Mongol drums started to echo across the plains. Slow, rhythmic, impossible to ignore. They didn't stop. Not for hours. Not even for a moment. The sound carried through the camp, through the tents, through the minds of men who were already exhausted and on edge. No one slept. Every shadow felt like a threat. Every sound felt like the beginning of another attack. The army that had marched in with confidence now sat in silence, waiting, listening, questioning. By the time dawn approached, they were no longer the same force that had taken the field the day before. They were tired. They were shaken. And for the first time, they were unsure. The Mongols hadn't won a battle yet, but they had already begun to win the war. Dawn on the second day didn't bring clarity, it brought pressure. The European army reformed, but it wasn't the same force that had stood so confidently the morning before. Men were exhausted, nerves frayed, tempers rising. Arguments broke out among commanders. Some demanded an immediate charge to end the harassment. Others warned that rushing forward would be exactly what the enemy wanted. In that tension, discipline began to crack. Not visibly, not yet, but enough to matter. When the Mongols returned, they didn't change their rhythm. Light cavalry approached, loosed arrows, and pulled back. It looked the same as the day before. Predictable. Almost familiar. And that was the trap. Eventually, pressure forced a decision. A partial cavalry advance was ordered, just enough, they believed, to push the Mongol riders back and regain some control of the battlefield. Around 2,000 of Europe's best knights surged forward, steel flashing, hooves pounding the ground like a rolling earthquake. It was the kind of charge that had broken armies for generations. This time, it broke nothing. The Mongols turned and fled. To the Europeans, it looked like victory finally taking shape. The enemy was retreating, just as expected. The knights pressed harder, accelerating, chasing the scattered riders across the open field. Adrenaline replaced caution. Formation stretched. Command dissolved into pursuit. Miles passed. The Mongols stayed just out of reach, close enough to be seen, far enough to never be caught. Occasionally, they turned and fired arrows mid-retreat, just enough to keep the pressure alive, just enough to provoke the chase further. The knights pushed on, driven by momentum, by pride, by the belief that they were finally winning. They weren't. By the time doubt crept in, it was already too late. The European cavalry was no longer a unified force. It had stretched into fragments, small groups separated by distance, each one moving at a different pace, each one isolated. That's when the battlefield changed. From the hills, from hidden positions, From directions no one had been watching, Mongol units emerged. Not retreating now, but closing in. Light cavalry that had circled unseen began tightening the perimeter. And then, something the Europeans hadn't expected at all, Mongol heavy cavalry joined the attack. The trap snapped shut. Surrounded on open ground, cut off from the main army, the knights found themselves in a fight they couldn't control. There was no clean charge, no clear line, no moment of impact that could turn the tide. Instead, they were boxed in, attacked from every direction by enemies who refused to stand still. Arrows came first, then more arrows. The Mongols didn't rush into close combat. They didn't need to. They rode in circles, releasing wave after wave of fire into a mass of armored men and exhausted horses. Every attempt to break out was met with coordinated resistance. Every push forward was redirected, contained, and punished. What followed wasn't a battle in the traditional sense. It was a dismantling. Knights who had spent their lives preparing for glory found themselves trapped in chaos, unable to reach their enemy, unable to escape. One by one they fell, not in heroic duels, but under a relentless system designed to wear them down and eliminate them. Of the thousands who charged that morning, only a fraction made it back. And they didn't return as soldiers. They returned as warnings. By the third day, fear had taken hold. The European army repositioned, choosing terrain more carefully this time, trying to anchor their flanks, trying to restore some sense of control. But the damage had already been done. Confidence was gone. Coordination was fragile. And the Mongols knew it. When the battle resumed, something was different. As the European forces advanced, thick clouds of smoke began to roll across the field. At first, it was confusing, unfamiliar devices releasing dense, choking waves that spread quickly, swallowing visibility. Within minutes, units lost sight of each other. Banners disappeared. Orders couldn't be seen, couldn't be followed. And then came the voices. Through the smoke, commands rang out, in Polish. Retreat. Fall back. It's over. For soldiers already on edge, already struggling to see, it sounded real. It sounded like their own leaders calling for withdrawal. Some hesitated, others obeyed. Lines wavered, and in that moment of uncertainty, panic ignited. What had been a formation became a crowd. Men collided. Units broke apart. Some tried to hold position, others turned to run, and in that confusion, trust vanished. No one knew what was real anymore, where the enemy was, where their allies were, what orders to follow. The Mongols moved in. Perfectly coordinated, as if the chaos didn't exist for them at all, they struck from multiple directions. Light cavalry harassed the edges, while heavier units drove into exposed gaps. Isolated groups of knights fought desperately, surrounded, unable to see more than a few feet in front of them. The elite orders, the Templars, the Teutonic Knights, stood their ground as long as they could. But even discipline has limits when structure collapses. One by one, they were overwhelmed. At the center, Duke Henry II tried to rally what remained. For a moment, it seemed possible. A small cluster of knights regrouped around him, pushing back against the chaos, trying to re-establish control. It didn't last. The pressure closed in. His guard fell one after another. Wounded, surrounded, and with no path out, Henry was brought down. His death wasn't just the fall of a leader, it was the breaking point. What remained of the army collapsed. Not into retreat, but into flight. And the Mongols pursued. Across the fields, over miles of open ground, they cut down fleeing soldiers without resistance. Armor was discarded. Weapons abandoned. Pride erased in the desperate instinct to survive. By midday, it was over. Not a defeat. An annihilation. By the time the dust settled on the fields of Legnica, the scale of what had happened was almost impossible to process. What had begun as a confident stand by one of the largest European forces ever assembled had ended in near total destruction. Thousands lay dead, knights, nobles, soldiers, entire bloodlines erased in a matter of hours. For many regions, it wasn't just a military loss. It was a generational collapse. But the physical damage, as devastating as it was, wasn't the most lasting impact. It was psychological. For centuries, European warfare had been built around a belief system, one where heavily armored knights represented the peak of military power. Strength, honor, and direct confrontation defined victory. That belief didn't just fail at Legnica. It shattered completely. The Mongols had exposed something far more dangerous than a weak army. They exposed a rigid mindset. Because what happened on that battlefield wasn't just about better weapons or superior numbers. It was about adaptability. The Mongols didn't fight the war Europe expected. They changed the rules entirely and then dominated within those rules. Speed over strength, coordination over individual heroics, strategy over tradition. And Europe had no answer. At least, not at first. Ironically, Europe was saved not by its own strength, but by events thousands of miles away. Just months after the victory, the great Khan Ogidi died in Mongolia. According to tradition, Mongol leaders had to return to participate in the selection of a new ruler. And just like that, the same force that had torn through Europe began to withdraw. Not because it was defeated, but because it chose to leave. That's the part most people overlook. Europe wasn't spared because it won. It was spared because the Mongols had something else to do. But the lesson stayed. In the years and decades that followed, European armies began to change. Slowly at first, then more deliberately. They adapted. Infantry became more important. Ranged weapons improved. Coordination replaced chaos. The era of relying solely on heavily armored knights began its long decline. In a way, Legnica forced evolution. Some historians even argue that without this brutal wake-up call, Europe might not have been prepared for future threats, like the rise of the Ottoman Empire centuries later. The shock of defeat became the foundation for transformation. And that's what makes this story still relevant today. Because at its core, this isn't just about a battle in 1241. It's about a principle that shows up everywhere. In business, in leadership, in life itself. The idea that what worked yesterday won't always work tomorrow. That success can quietly turn into vulnerability if you stop adapting. That confidence, without awareness, can become your greatest weakness. The Mongols didn't just defeat an army at Legnica. They defeated an outdated way of thinking. And they did it in 3 days. If you enjoy stories like this, where history isn't just about the past, but about the patterns that shape success and failure, make sure to subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more coming. Stories that don't just tell you what happened, but help you understand why it mattered, and how those same lessons still apply today.